Thank you so much for joining us today in this session this afternoon. My name is Addie. I'm a principal product manager on the EC2 AWS Digital Sovereignty team. And joining me today is Luis Wang. Luis, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Addie. Hi, everyone. My name is Luis Wang. I lead the EC2 core product management team, and my team is also responsible for digital sovereignty initiatives across AWS. Super excited to be here to talk about digital sovereignty today.
Right, thank you, Luis. Welcome to the session SEC216, AWS European Sovereign Cloud, a closer look. Today in this session, we're going to talk a little bit about digital sovereignty, its different flavors, and dive deeper into our most recent announcement, which is the AWS European Sovereign Cloud. So let's start by taking a couple of minutes to really unpack what digital sovereignty means. And it means different things to different people. There is no single definition of this term yet, I would say. And what we've seen is we live in a world right now where there's so much uncertainty. It has prompted governments across the world to really go back and rethink how they want to safeguard their critical data, infrastructure, and also their digital economy, right? In the last few years, we've seen heightened focus on this topic by governments across the world, especially in Europe. Some countries have even rolled out regulations around digital sovereignty. For example, in France, there is the SEC216 Cloud regulation, which indexes pretty heavily on the ownership requirements and the operational autonomy aspects. And then in Germany, you have the C5 regulation, which pretty much dictates how the requirements for public sector workloads. The interesting aspect here is that this digital sovereignty and its meaning is pretty fragmented across the board, and there's no uniform definition or understanding of how it applies to the different types of workloads, and also how it varies across different sectors and verticals across the board. As we have been speaking with a lot of our customers, right, we've been trying to understand and really deep dive with them as to what it means to each one of them. And based on some of their inputs, I'm going to kind of walk you through with what we've learned. The first aspect of this, of how they refer to digital sovereignty, is indexing around data residency. And when they talk about data residency, when I'm talking about customers, right, they want to know where all their data is stored. They want to control where it's stored and also where it's transferred to. The second flavor that we see is around the operator access restriction. And this is where customers are telling us that they want to make sure that neither AWS nor any foreign government or entity has access to my data on the cloud. The third piece is around the resiliency and the survivability aspect, right? And this one has got to do with the fact that, with the recent geopolitical scenario across the board, everybody is talking about how they want to make sure that they're able to sustain their operations despite a disruption, whether it's man-made or natural. And when I'm talking about disruptions, it could take the form of, a geopolitical crisis, a diplomatic crisis, sabotage, or even a natural disaster, right? So this particular flavor kind of speaks to that. And the next one has got to do with the operational autonomy. And the sentiment behind that has got to do with, hey, I want to make sure that I'm fostering my local economy, right? I'm building skills and infrastructure in my country. I'm making sure that I'm competing at a global scale. So while all of these concepts come together to really define, come together and say hey, this is what digital sovereignty means for each one of us, right? And what we've realized is that our customers are telling us that they're concerned that they have to choose between the full power of AWS Sovereign Cloud versus other feature-limited solutions that are out there. And I think, as part of AWS, we firmly believe that customers should not have to make the choice. Since day one, we've always believed that customers should be in control of their data, and they should have the capabilities and choices to manage and store their data in the cloud. And that's why we, last year in November 2022, we released our AWS Digital Sovereignty Pledge. This pledge is our commitment to offer all AWS customers the widest and the most advanced set of sovereignty controls and features available in the cloud. And as I've said before, right, sovereignty has been a priority for AWS since the very beginning, right? We've been working very closely with customers, regulators, and partners across the board to really understand and break down that taxonomy and see what are the capabilities that we can build to support our customers in that space. If you haven't read the pledge, I'd highly encourage you to please go check it out. As part of the pledge, we've committed to meeting some of these requirements that our customers have shared with us. Having control over location of your data. And that's where we say, like, hey, we want to make sure that you have more fine-grained controls to make sure that your data stays in the region which you select and which you want it to be in. The second one talks about verifiable control over data access. And this has got to do with the fact that we want to build additional access restrictions which will further limit access of AWS employees or even outside entities to access the data. The third one has got to do with the ability to encrypt everything everywhere. So whether it's about bringing your own keys outside of the AWS cloud or within AWS, there are plenty of options there, and we want to make sure that we're continuing to invest and innovate in that space. The fourth pillar being the resilience of the cloud, where we want to make sure that we're always innovating and enhancing our capabilities to make sure that the cloud is resilient and that you are able to sustain your operations through disconnection. Ever since we've launched this pledge, we've made a series of further announcements, in this direction to support the pledge. And as you can see on the screen here, right? Let me kind of walk you through a little bit on, what I'm talking about. We launched the AWS KMS external key store last year, which allows for customers to bring external keys and integrate them with the AWS cloud. We also went ahead and got our AWS Nitro system attestation and included, some of the security claims that we made as part of that into our contractual clauses. In August, we launched dedicated local zones, which is another new infrastructure offering, which allows for certain specific customers with specific regulatory needs to take care of their data. And then I think just in October, we announced the AWS European Sovereign Cloud, for which we're going to have Luis kind of dive you guys through that. And then just 2 days ago, we launched a bunch of capabilities as part of the AWS Control Tower, where 65 controls were released pretty recently. So I'll start by talking about the data residency piece, right? As you know, we have the largest global footprint that gives our customers the most flexibility and choice in terms of where they can store their data. To date, we've launched about 32 regions around the world with 102 AZs. We've announced plans for 5 more regions around the world, and they include Canada, Germany, Malaysia, New Zealand, and Thailand, which will add approximately more than 15 availability zones too. Customers can use AWS services with the confidence that their data stays in the region that they select. And we want to make sure that customers are able to use these regions to not just store their data, but also make sure that they have visibility into where it's stored or where it's moved. As part of the most recent announcement, again tied back to the data residency pillar and the requirement that customers have shared with us, we launched the dedicated local zones. This is a new infrastructure offering from us, which is fully managed by AWS, exclusively for the use of customers or community, and placed specifically in a location specified by the customer in a data center or a location of their choice. It provides pretty much the same benefits as what local zones provide in terms of elasticity, pay-as-you-go pricing, as well as scalability and, of course, security. It is, again, powered by the AWS Nitro system, so the security bar here is pretty much at the same par with our AWS regions across the globe. And the specific use case for this particular offering has got to do with customers who have regulations that warrant them to make sure that their data is for sensitive and critical workload type of data classification, and which is housed in a facility that is closer or in more proximity to where they want it to be. AWS Control Tower, this is one of my favorites. So AWS Control Tower is a very simple and efficient way to manage a multi-account AWS environment, right? And as part of this, what Control Tower does is that it gives you the ability to define, implement, and manage governance controls, which ensure that your data is, stays at the location which you've, chosen it for to be, and also makes sure that it doesn't go anywhere else, right, other than the region that you select. And I'm super excited to kind of share with you that just yesterday we launched a bunch of I think it was about 65 controls that were launched just 2 days ago as part of this, as part of an enhancement of Control Tower. And and maybe I'll kind of walk you through with some of the enhancements, right? So as part of the Control Tower guardrails, it basically provides you preventative, detective guardrails. And one of the things that they did was, as part of the enhancement, was that EC2 instances, right, when you spin one up, it makes sure that it's using a Nitro-based instance. And I think the one that I feel is most interesting is got to do with the region deny guardrails. So let me kind of unpack what that means. Region deny guardrails basically help you to make sure that that your data is stored or it doesn't flow to any other region that you did not select, right? And when you turn this on, it's making sure that you have visibility into where your data is, and it provides you that through an enhanced dashboard as well, where you can see the status of your compliance, et cetera. As part of this release, what AWS Control Tower has done is that it has gone it used to only apply to landing zones, but they've gone beyond landing zones and have it applied to at an organization level. And what that typically means is that, let's say you have multiple accounts in your organization, right? And you want to make sure that your organization is using only, let's say, the Germany region for your data needs. When you turn on this region deny guardrail feature, what it does is it makes sure that any account which kind of rolls up into your organization is only making sure that it is not spinning up any instances or is not storing your data outside of that region. And the beauty of it is that there's an enhanced dashboard which has its own digital sovereignty category where you can actually view all of these controls and also see the status of compliance against these controls. So that is a pretty cool feature that they launched just 2 days ago. The AWS Nitro system. So our existing regions, our dedicated local zones, as well as the AWS European Sovereign Cloud are all powered by the AWS Nitro system. Over 10 years, we've been reinventing the EC2 virtualization stack to offload as much as we can the virtualization functions into dedicated hardware and firmware, right? And this is, with the AWS Nitro system, it makes sure that the integrity and confidentiality of your data is maintained, right? By providing a strong physical and logical security boundary, Nitro is designed to enforce restrictions so that nobody, including anybody at AWS, is not able to access your data on your host. And we actually had a third party, right? It's a cybersecurity firm called NCC, which came down to AWS to really validate our security claim of like, hey, nobody at AWS can actually access your data on the AWS host. And they've published a report which is available on our website. So if you're interested, please go do check it out. We went one step beyond, once we kind of moved on from that attestation, is that we've included or updated our service terms to actually state that there are no mechanisms today by way of which any AWS employee can take any technical measures or APIs to modify, copy, extract, or even access data on AWS Nitro. So that is how we're trying to make sure that the whole access restriction element is addressed here with Nitro. External key store, this is an interesting one, right? Encryption, pretty critical to operator, making sure that nobody from outside has access to your data. So it's tied back to that pillar or that requirement, right? External key store is, one more additional choice for customers to manage their keys in the cloud. And what this does is that it makes sure that if you want to integrate any of your own external keys outside of the AWS cloud, you can actually integrate with AWS KMS, which is a AWS key management store. Certain jurisdictions, right, and this is for customers where there are certain jurisdictions which actually scope out who is in control of the key, what is the retention policy of it, and also who is the owner of that key. So this speaks to very specific type of customers who have critical sensitive workloads where, and there's also regulation which is warranting them to kind of bring your own key to the AWS cloud, and this addresses that. I'm going to go into the customer stories, right? Like I want to make sure that you guys understand and can actually, the customer stories are a good demonstration of how some of our offerings and features on the roadmap are playing out. So let's start with this one.
Privatbank is the largest financial institution in Ukraine. Since 2016, nationalized, so fully owned by the state. Before that, 31 years of history on the market. Primarily, we are the retail bank with over 20 million retail customers served. We also have a solid SME business, so small and medium enterprise supporting them. We are serving up to 50% market share in terms of the payments. Nobody expected the war. So actually, as anyone who was living in there, the same was happening to us and our employees and our branches and our system. So we were confronted with the fact that actually we had the bombs coming from different angles and actually Russian troops entering the country. So we had to make sure whatever is possible to protect our people and our employees so they are safe and secure. We also had to actually make sure that our services are available for our clients. When you are having a panic and actually you would like to withdraw the cash, you have to make sure that the cash is in ATMs, that the branches are operating, and actually there's enough cash in the system. So our role to, whenever it was possible, to make sure that all the services, electronic way as well in the cash, are available for our population. We had to focus on making sure that the critical infrastructure, our co-banking services and co-banking systems are secured. So we decided at that time to migrate to the Amazon. After the positive decision of the regulator, the National Bank of Ukraine, we actually started the process beginning of March. We had 2 data centers on premise. The war started, Russians around, we decided to work with Amazon. Amazon was actually the primary partner of us, helping us to move whatever we had on the premise. First, we started with the critical services and infrastructure components. So within the first 2 months, we actually migrated all the applications, all the critical services, and we started to operate with the Amazon cloud. It was one of the fastest migrations ever happened. So actually, you can imagine the effort sitting on our side and also on the effort on actually and flexibility on the Amazon side. And luckily, in that short period of time, we were able to preserve and protect our business. So actually, without much of the interruptions during the migration. With the support of Amazon colleagues and the infrastructure, we simply packed everything what was possible and we placed that in the Amazon. So that was an achievement. Happily, it didn't impact the business operations. So clients were happy, the owner was happy, so the shareholder that we didn't actually stop the operating. And the clients, as the people who were dealing with that, I think we were having a great success story behind.
So this example, is a very special one. And I say that because there are these perceptions, right? And these are pretty perceptions that have kind of still stayed on with customers, right? Who think that hosting your workloads on premise is a lot more, safer, secure option, right? And with this Ukraine-Russia story here, I think that's where, it was sort of eye-opening for some of the government officials as well, right? To really understand the value that the cloud brings to it. And let me kind of walk you through as to like how this kind of came about. So initially, right, the Ukraine government had a law which required for governments to host, and not just governments, but also certain verticals to host their data on premise. And 1 week before the Russian invasion, they actually rolled out a legislation which allowed these governments and also these verticals, right, regulated industry verticals, to move to the cloud. And that's when Ukraine, I think, put a call out for help, and AWS stepped in. So we as in our AWS public sector team and the AWS disaster recovery team, came together to work very closely with the Ukraine officials to really understand what type of workloads are we talking about, right? And they established a project called as Project Sunflower. And this is what came out of that Project Sunflower, some of the outcomes that we achieved. Petabytes of data was migrated pretty quickly, right, of critical workload, government workload data. A lot of records of students, right, from their degrees to the curriculum. All of that was migrated over to the cloud. Folks who had land in Ukraine and they had papers against it, we built an automated system for them to be able to retrieve those records at a later point in time. And then there was a lot of research, right, by the scientists in Ukraine that they were doing for the measurement of air quality given the nuclear aspects, that were ongoing with this war situation. So those were like some key outcomes, right, that we managed to kind of get through with the whole Ukraine government here. So this is one of those examples, and I want to walk you through with one more, right? AXA Germany, it's a global insurer and a wealth manager serving about 90 million customers in more than 50 countries, right? AXA's digital transformation move to the cloud strategy is what they wanted to make sure that they, A, move to the cloud, and B, are able to comply with the data protection and regulations that the financial services regulator in Germany has queued up for them, right? So by leveraging the AWS cloud, AXA Germany was easily able to comply with the complex and changing security requirements, which, within its heavily regulated industry, driven by the German Federal Financial Supervisory Authority, the German IT Security Act 2.0, and the European General Data Protection Act, which I think all of you guys know about. The third example that I'm going to talk about is the Singapore government. And this is also another special one because, 90% of our product roadmap is based on customer feedback. And actually, as a matter of fact, the whole dedicated local zone offering, which we launched in August and I covered a few minutes ago, was an outcome of collaboration with the Singapore government, right? And dedicated local zones, as we realized that, hey, this probably has potential to be expanded to not just Singapore, but other customers who have similar needs. And that's when we decided to extend that offering, and we actually coined it as dedicated local zones, which we launched recently. With DLZ and Singapore, the approach was not just around sovereign requirements, but it was also they wanted to make sure that they're benefiting from some of the the cloud aspects, right, which are related to resilience and transparency. And that's how, the DLZ was born. With DLZs, the Singapore government was able to meet their most stringent data isolation and security requirements, thereby enabling Singapore to run their more sensitive workloads in the cloud securely. So these are a couple of examples, right, where sovereignty, cloud, the geopolitical aspects, and the different requirements that we're hearing from customers across the board all came together. I'm now going to hand over to Luis to walk you guys with the AWS European Sovereign Cloud, and take it away from here, Luis. Thank you.
Thank you. So, with our sovereignty pledge that we announced last year, and our sovereign by design capabilities, we really want to enable all of our customers in our commercial regions around the world to be able to benefit from these elevated levels of capabilities. So as Adi walked through, Nitro system is a great example of a sovereign by design capabilities that adds additional data protection to our customers, ensuring that AWS has no access to their data. That is enabled by default. And AWS is the only cloud service provider with such unique capabilities. And again, with external key store or control tower, we provide capabilities that allows customers to add additional technical measures so that they can meet their unique sovereign needs. And dedicated local zone, great example of how we work backwards with our customers in partnership with them to tear down additional and sometimes archaic barriers towards cloud adoption. As Adam mentioned in his keynote the other day, AWS is all about providing the choice and selection for customers to run, foundational models for Gen AI. In the context of digital sovereignty, it's not very different either, right? We believe that because there is no single uniform definition, we want to provide customers more choice for them to run their highly regulated and sovereign requirement, which is why in October of this year, we announced the AWS European Sovereign Cloud. So before we actually dive into what AWS European Sovereign Cloud is, I do want to show again this slide. I know we've showed it again before earlier. And I want to talk a little bit about our AWS global infrastructure. Many of you know already that our regions today are built in such a way that are physically independent and isolated, right? The services that run on these regions, most services are also built in such a way that takes no dependencies on other regions. And this is critically important because we don't want any issues from one region to permeate and cause correlated failures in other regions. So this is a choice by design, and it is something that we have been doing at AWS since the very, very early days of our journey, okay? Our global infrastructure and our excellence here is not just an outcome of it's not just a technical one, it's also an operational one. All of these regions around the world today are operated by our globally distributed engineering teams. So in fact, many of you may not know, a lot of our key components and foundational capabilities at AWS is actually built in Europe, right? We have the Nitro system, which is built in Europe. Our CloudWatch services are built in Europe. And all of these teams around the world are responsible for servicing, operating, and supporting our global infrastructure. And that is how we are able to deliver some of the highest resiliency and availability of any cloud service provider, okay? Now, raise of hand, who here uses more than one region in AWS today? All right, great. I see quite a number of hands. I would imagine you use many regions today with possibly a single set of accounts, right, that allows you to manage your resources across multiple of these regions and also be able to get a single bill from AWS, leveraging various kinds of discount programs like cross-region, upfront commitment, bulk purchasing discount programs that AWS offers. These are possible because all of these regions share a single account system and a single billing system, okay? So now, let's shift gears. Let's take a look at how AWS European Sovereign Cloud is different, what it is, why do we build it? AWS European Sovereign Cloud is a new infrastructure offering. It is a new, independent, and separate infrastructure from our existing commercial regions, and we've built it primarily to address the increasing demand from public sector organizations and private enterprises that are running highly regulated workloads to be able to move to the cloud and meet their unique sovereign requirements. And primarily, when we talk about sovereign requirements here, we often think of two things that comes up in every single conversation. One is customers want added operational autonomy over their cloud infrastructure. And second, customers want enhanced data residency to meet certain data protection regulations, such as GDPR, for example. Okay, so these are the things that we're trying to solve. Today, AWS already have a very, very strong presence in Europe. In fact, we have 8 AWS regions, and the European Sovereign Cloud is a new addition to that, but it is completely separate and independent from these AWS regions, okay? Another key important characteristic of the AWS European Sovereign Cloud is that it is built on decades of experience from AWS operating independent and highly partitioned cloud infrastructure for the most critical workloads in the cloud. So what do I mean by that? When we set out this journey to figure out how do we solve for AWS, how do we solve for European sovereignty, and how can AWS help customers meet those sovereign requirements, it turned out that we actually didn't need to look very far. It turns out that we have been meeting these requirements for over a decade already. In the US, AWS has the AWS GovCloud regions for the US government. We also have top secret and secret regions that are used for the intelligence community. All of these capabilities are things that are environments that AWS has been operating and running, and we know that they are things that we can do those things again because we have the experience to build and to operate these at scale. One important thing here is that with the AWS European Sovereign Cloud, this is not a unique offering. Okay, this is something we've done before. It is not a snowflake, and the reason that matters is because from the customer's perspective, it means that you get all the same experience, all of your tooling, scripts, and automations will just work, and you'll make it very easy for customers to be able to adopt. Now, let's look at a little bit at the infrastructure characteristic of the European Sovereign Cloud. First of all, we plan to launch the European Sovereign Cloud with its first region in Germany. And in the future, we expect there might be more regions, but we don't have anything concrete to share right now. So the mental model that you can think about it is we have these existing commercial regions that are part of the global commercial cloud infrastructure, and the European Sovereign Cloud sits side by side as something that is completely separate but dedicated for European sovereignty. It is designed in such a way that, like all of our AWS commercial regions, it has multiple availability zones. It comes with AWS Nitro system by default. It has all of the sovereign controls that we just talked about, like Control Tower, KMS, external key store. So all of those capabilities will also be available in the European Sovereign Cloud to provide customers with added level of controls for their workloads. And as you can see here, the European Sovereign Cloud will also have its own billing, usage, and also IAM systems that are hosted separately and independent from our commercial regions today. And what this means from a customer standpoint is to use the European Sovereign Cloud, you will use a different set of accounts and credentials to provision, manage, and scale your cloud infrastructure. And it also means that you will get a separate bill from our European business entities. Now, we've been hearing a lot in Europe. There's been increasing demand for operational autonomy, or some people call it operational sovereignty. But the primary motivation of operational autonomy or sovereignty is to address concerns around political instability. They want to be able to prevent any kind of political sanctions, sabotages, and disruptions against their critical cloud workloads. So I mentioned earlier in our commercial regions today, all of the regions are operated by our globally distributed engineering teams. With the European Sovereign Cloud, what we want to do is give Europeans the full control, the full operational control of this European Sovereign Cloud. And what that means is AWS employees who are EU residents, who are physically located in the EU, will have full control over the operations, full control over the support of this new cloud environment. And that includes customer service, that includes technical support, that includes the day-to-day management and running the services that are hosted in this region. And that, of course, includes also the data center operation aspect of it. I mentioned earlier that we have a lot of engineering teams already present in the EU today, and with the European Sovereign Cloud, we're going to continue to hire and develop local skills to support these regions and help our customers meet their objectives. Another differentiator of the European Sovereign Cloud is around providing enhanced data residency to our customers. So you already know that today, in our commercial regions, you have full control over your own data. That means you have full control over where you store your content, in which region. You have full control over where you want to transfer that content, and AWS never touches or transfers your content without your consent. And we give you all the encryption capabilities that you need to secure and protect that content. And when I talk about customer content, I generally mean things like content in your S3 bucket, in your RDS database, in your EC2 instance, for example. So like the AWS Nitro system is a good example of a capability where we make claims that AWS operators have no access to the customer data that are hosted within those EC2 instances, okay? But when it comes to sovereignty, there are some customers and some regulators have stricter interpretations of data residency requirements that goes beyond actually customer content. So with the European Sovereign Cloud, what we set out to do is raise the bar and go above and beyond customer content and include enhanced data resident controls for what we call customer-generated metadata. And in simple terms, customer-generated metadata are simply customer inputs and configuration used to run their AWS resources. So a good example are your IAM user, your IAM roles, your permissions, your security policies, your resource labels such as names and tags. With the European Sovereign Cloud, all of that customer-generated metadata will now strictly reside within the EU. All right, let's talk about infrastructure again. This is really one of my favorite topics because I think that AWS, we have demonstrated over and over again sort of like the high bar that we maintain when it comes to AWS regions and infrastructure design. AWS delivers the highest level of resiliency and availability of any cloud service provider. And that is really not an accident. Since day one, we have made the deliberate choice that all of our regions around the world, including our commercial regions, and of course, including the AWS European Sovereign Cloud, is going to strictly abide to a multi-AZ architecture, okay? And when I say multi-AZ, I mean multiple availability zones. An availability zone is a fully isolated partition that is designed to operate independently. And an availability zone, when you zoom in, can be comprised of one or more data centers, okay, that are also physically separated. And if you zoom in further, you will find that these data centers will each have multiple layers of power, networking, connectivity, redundancies housed within separate facilities. So we really live by that multi-AZ architecture, and every single infrastructure region that we build will conform to these requirements. And when we decided to build the AWS Sovereign Cloud, we also decided that we must be able to deliver this level of architectural excellence to meet our customers' need, which is unlike some of the many cloud service providers and sovereign clouds out there who claim that they have multiple availability zones, but in reality, they just house everything in a single data center. So we were able to, over many, many years, this is one example where we were able to earn the trust of our customers to run some of the most critical workloads on AWS. Because there is no single definition of digital sovereignty, we also don't believe that there's a single solution. So within AWS, we offer a very wide spectrum, a continuum, we call it, of capabilities that allows us to meet customers' need where they are, both physically technologically, operationally, and even contractually. So we talked a lot about the region concept already with our commercial regions, the European Sovereign Cloud, but there's a lot more. So for example, local zones is an infrastructure concept that places compute, storage, and network and databases close to where the end users are in the metro areas. And it also brings additional data residency benefits to customers. And with AWS Wavelength, it is the same thing, but placing these workloads closer to the 5G network. Customers can also deploy AWS Outposts or AWS local zones within their on-premises or in any location they choose to leverage AWS capabilities. Of course, we have our AWS IoT services that allows customers to build smart devices on AWS, and our Snow family of rugged devices allows customers to deploy compute and storage in the most disconnected and remote locations. The key thing that I want you to take away from this is that across this continuum of offerings, we want customers to be able to leverage all of these solutions with the same consistent experience, the same APIs, the same consoles, because these experiences are critical so the customer doesn't need to reinvent the wheel. They can leverage all the ecosystem of capabilities around AWS to quickly accelerate their cloud journey. So when we announced European Sovereign Cloud, we heard from a lot of customers and regulators that they love the idea. They like the EU-only operators. They like the enhanced metadata residency where those customer-generated metadata is only going to remain within the EU boundary. But some customer regulators have told us that there are, in fact, unique regulations and archaic regulations that still demand customer data, customer workloads to be hosted on premises. Okay? So we believe that that continuum that you just saw, it's not either or. You can use all of these things together. So one of the very common use cases that we see that we're hearing with the European Sovereign Cloud that customers are very much interested is deploying outposts or local zones, either in their existing on-prem environment or in whatever colo or partner side that they would like, right? And connect that and parent that to the European Sovereign Cloud. And what that means is they are able to meet the needs from a regulatory standpoint by keeping specific data on site while still being able to get the benefit of EU-only operators and the enhanced metadata residency that we talked about earlier. So to me, the best way to really summarize all of this is sort of like a layered approach where, fundamentally our industry-leading infrastructure really underpins all of AWS offering, whether it is a commercial regions or our sovereign cloud. They have the same security, availability, and performance, and they have the same experience as well. And on top of that, we layer in our sovereign by design capabilities. So these are things, again, we talk about the Nitro system, we talk about KMS, XKS, control tower with more than 245 controls that allows customers to implement guardrails around the workloads on AWS. And one thing particular that is really worth mentioning is that whether you're looking at our commercial regions or the European Sovereign Cloud, one important thing to note is that from a security standpoint, they are the same. One is not more secure than the other, okay? And in fact, we actually believe that for the most part, for most customers, for most workloads, our commercial region is still the way to go, right? However, if you're a customer or if you need to abide for specific regulations or guidance that requires your cloud service provider to provide stronger operational control, stronger customer content and metadata control, then we have an offering with the European Sovereign Cloud to meet those additional layers of requirements. It is not sufficient for me to be standing here and tell you that, hey, AWS European Sovereign Cloud will meet all of your sovereignty requirements. We need support and buy-in from the European regulators, from the European policymaker, from national cybersecurity agencies, and of course, from the data protection authorities as well. And that's what we've been doing for the past several years, is working closely with these agencies, having deep engagement and collaboration, taking in those learnings to make sure that what we're designing will meet not just the regulations that are existing now, but that are going to come up in the future. A good example is Germany. So in Germany, digital transformation is a big focus for them right now. And the way to do that for them is adopting the cloud. We've been working in Germany with the German cybersecurity agency called BSI for many years already. In fact, so BSI is the author of the C5 certification, and AWS was the first cloud service provider to get certified for it. And the C5, as some of you may know, is pretty influential, not just within Europe, but also outside of Europe, like in Asia Pacific, for example. A lot of other national cybersecurity agencies takes a lot of inspiration from what they have done. So we partner with them as well on the European Sovereign Cloud in terms of the technical architecture, the design, the operational model, and we look forward to continue in working with them on the delivery of the European Sovereign Cloud. And not just with BSI, but with other agencies like the German DPAs and other agencies all across Europe. Beyond regulators, when we announced the European Sovereign Cloud, we also saw overwhelming support from some of our largest customers and companies in Europe across a variety of different industries, from telecommunications, financial services, healthcare, as well as industry-leading like consultancies, managed service providers, and system integrators, all welcoming the AWS Sovereign Cloud as something that can help them address more and more sovereign requirements. And I know that some of the folks are actually here in the audience as well, and we look forward to partnering with them on the delivery of this solution. AWS today has over 100,000 partners around the world. We know that sovereignty is not easy. Again, for the 100th time, it is very much undefined and will continue to evolve. And it will require not just AWS, but working with partners and working with customers to address this, particularly given the fast changing pace on the sovereignty landscape that we're seeing. So from a partner perspective, we really see a lot of opportunities for partners to come in, step in, and help. First of all, is by building solutions on top of our cloud that helps customers configure and manage and own their sovereign destiny within the cloud. Because the European Sovereign Cloud provides an additional choice for customers, many customers that are not on AWS today and are not on the cloud today represent a big opportunity for partners to unblock those workloads. And given the complexity of sovereignty, partner plays a big role in helping customer understand what really applies to them, what version of sovereignty do they need to look into and provide them with that guidance. AWS is committed to offering our customers the most advanced set of controls and privacy safeguards and security features available in the cloud. As you have seen over the last 12 months, we've been busy. We've been really busy since the Sovereign Pledge in announcing all of these capabilities. We talked about nitrate citation. We talked about XKS. We talked about Control Tower. All it is to help our customers be able to address the increasing sovereignty requirements in our AWS commercial regions. And then with new infrastructure offerings like dedicated local zone, a European Sovereign Cloud, being able to elevate that further. So before we close out, there's a few things I wanted to say. First of all is we know that cloud adoption journey can take time. Migrating workloads takes a lot of time. And oftentimes it requires a change in culture, a change in technology, a change in operations to be able to do this. And one of the things that we've learned for many years is that the best way to be good at it, to develop these capabilities, to get familiarized with the cloud, is by starting to build, okay? And that can mean many different ways, you know. Some customers start by deploying some dev workload in the cloud. Some customers identify a new project and then just start building in the cloud. But the point is, don't wait to get building, okay? We've designed the European Sovereign Cloud specifically, as I mentioned earlier, so that it behaves and operates the same way as our commercial regions, so that the skills, the tools, the scripts that you have already developed or are about to develop can be leveraged and migrated to the European Sovereign Cloud if that is a thing for you. So, and last thing, we, over the last year have developed a lot of resources, white papers, and artifacts to help customers, guide customers through this process and help them understand not just our approach, but also our technical paradigms. And here are some resources of press release, blog posts, of some key announcements that we have made over the past several months. I hope that is helpful. Thank you so much for attending today. I hope you had a great reInvent and what's remaining of it.